in tiny increments. So if they get 2 more miles on a CAFE standard, that's a huge achievement for them, and it really means nothing in terms of the climate.
Paul, you have a comment?
Yes, I do. I think there's a tendency among any larger political advocacy group to register successes on a regular basis. And as Ross said, a 2% here, a 2% there really doesn't deliver much of anything on the big picture. And yet you have generally a negotiation-oriented approach to politics among the larger groups where direct confrontation is needed and a commitment to the big picture without a willingness to negotiate. And that is definitely lacking among the larger groups.
I certainly support the arguments that Ross offered, but how do we operate in a climate where regulation of any kind is considered some unhealthy virus, and politically regulation is very hard to achieve? What we see is the opposite, that there's a lot of work dismantling the regulations that people worked so hard for over the last 30 years. Ross?
Peter, I think that's a little bit of a mischaracterization. I think energy right now is the most highly regulated commodity there is, from price fixing at OPEC to utility protection regulations to federal subsidies to all kinds of other regulatory mechanisms. And so I don't think it's a question of imposing regulations on energy. It's already regulated. I think it's a question of changing those regulations and tilting them in a different way so that we phase out fossil fuels and begin to phase in these renewables.
Paul, you referenced in your comments that local regulation isn't always popular. How do you operate there at the grassroots level where people tend to resist new regulations?
Well, in my own case, we have taken an approach where we focus on where the points of, in politics you can go different ways. You can go for issues, on the basis of issues, and often you find groups that focus on issues, like a pro-solar group that says we should have more solar power. Well, it's very easy to say we should have more solar power. The issue when you're in the legislature fighting over a bill isn't whether you're for solar or not, any more than whether you're against war or for war. The issue comes down to where are the points of control? Who's controlling a transaction? Should they continue to control that transaction, or should some other entity get the control? And if your approach coming in is that you just want to negotiate with whoever's in control right now and get them to give you pennies on the dollar, then you're going to always lose. The big picture will always lose. But if you come in and say, look, we want to fundamentally change the structure of an industry or the way that energy is sold, for example, and make the case for why it needs to change. I think most people understand why it is that PG&E or Edison or Sempra shouldn't be entrusted with energy planning in California. And so I think while generically the political rhetoric often dictates against regulation, suspicion of government, there's actually a far broader public suspicion toward corporate control that really has not been reaped by politicians, but is very easily reaped. And successes are not that difficult to achieve if you just have the balls to do it.
Some of that, as Ross suggested, is systemic and linked to campaign finance, because many of the elected leaders who are unwilling to be bold, as you suggest, are looking for those contributions from the very people that you would seek to regulate. Final question. What gives you hope? Ross?
An audience like this is a good start, I'll tell you that. Really, I must say, this is a very depressing subject to follow. There are a lot of mornings I wake up and I want to slit my wrist. I am very concerned about my 2 daughters who are in their late 20s right now. So I guess what gives me hope is 2 things. One, even though all the trends we see in nature are very ominous, the real honest truth is we don't know. We don't understand how all these interactions work. We don't understand how all these complexities interact. So that's a little bit of a leap of faith. The other thing that gives me hope is that I've seen in my lifetime, the rapid social change can happen as quickly as rapid climate change. And I think of the wall in Berlin coming down in a couple of years. I think about apartheid being thrown over very suddenly. Right now I know there are hundreds and hundreds of groups working on the climate issue all over the country. They're like all these termites doing various things at different levels. I don't know what the catalyzing event could be, but my hope lies in the fact that we could have a rapid social eruption over this issue, and absent that, I do not have very good reasons to be hopeful.
Paul Fenn?
My cause for hope is something I learned in politics, which was if you get a city council to approve something, then their local legislative delegation has to support it. If the local delegation supports it, well, then the local congressional delegation has to support it. And quite effortlessly, by passing a simple ordinance or resolution through a city council or board of supervisors, really quite effortlessly in my own experience, you can garner the support of your entire congressional delegation. The power of the local gives me a great deal of hope because it really hasn't required that much political effort or that much funding or structural support to do the things I've done. And I do feel that if local communities wake up to their power and learn how to exercise it, they'll realize that much of the inertia they face isn't so much the overwhelming power of some colossal power of money, although it is significant. But it's more just the inertia of the local over a century and a half of centralization of power. And so I see a lot of potential in that, just in the potential of a few people to make a few phone calls and then a few more phone calls and the exponential growth of those phone calls until it becomes something.
Ross Gelbspan? Paul Fenn? Thank you very much. And thank you for being here tonight.
Good.